Hello, welcome back to another video. My name is Gemma and today I'm going to be wrapping up all of the books, I've got hair in my mouth, with all of the books that I read in November. So, November was an odd, peculiar reading month. I think I had a book from almost every rating, starting down at 2 stars, right up to 5 stars. So it's a really mixed bag. Some disappointments, some surprises, and a couple of gems at the top of my list today that you really should read. So no waffle. I do have a bit of a cold, so I will try and edit out the snuffles, but you have to bear with me. It's that time of year and the kids are disgusting and gross and bringing back germs, and that is my life. So let's just start. Let's start at the bottom. So I read 7 books. I didn't DNF any, which is quite unusual for me. But yeah, there's 7 and the first is a 2-star. And I was really disappointed because I had so much expectation for this book. It just didn't deliver. And the book was Light from Uncommon Stars by Ryka Aoki. And yeah, a lot of people had really praised this book. It is a trans story by a trans author and it is sci-fi, and those things in my mind were like tick tick tick, yes, that sounds like a Gemma book. The premise of this one was that we have a young trans girl who is a passionate violinist, but she is growing up in a family that is unsupportive of her, and she runs away and she's sort of found by this violin master who agrees to teach her. But the twist is that this violin master, and this is not a spoiler, this is all very early on and in the blurb, this violin master is working with a demon and she has to deliver the souls of 7 talented musicians in order to sort of get her own soul back, broadly. Right, so that is the premise. That's more or less what you'll get if you read the back of the book. There is a side story, again, not spoiling anything, there is a side story where we are following a woman who is the captain of a spaceship who's landed on Earth and is running a donut shop, but the donut shop is sort of like this spaceship. Yeah, it sounds bizarre. It is bizarre. And I think my issue, I had quite a few issues with this book, but the biggest issue for me was that these 2 storylines did not work cohesively together. It felt like 2 stories all the way through. There's a slight area where they intersect, which I won't tell you about because that would be a spoiler. There is an area where they connect, and really until the end the storylines you kind of don't understand why they're both in this book. And I thought the ending was awful. I thought it was awful. I thought it was such a cop-out of an ending. And so we've got these 2 storylines. I didn't really care about either of them. I did like the main protagonist. I thought she was cool and interesting, but I didn't like the violin teacher. I liked some of the side characters. I didn't like the donut shop lady, and it just seemed ridiculous. Like, a lot of it felt really ridiculous to me, and I didn't like it. I didn't like it. No, not a Gemma book. Definitely not. Mate, it sounded like a Gemma book, but it wasn't a Gemma book. I'm really salty about it because everyone loved it and I didn't. And I don't like it. So that's number 7. In at number 6, we have a new release and a debut novel. So I feel a bit bad that it's so far down my list. But I also gave this one 2 stars, and that was I Died at Fallow Hall by Buke-Patel. I mean, the cover for this is beautiful. I first saw this on Simon Savage's channel, Savage Reads, and then I saw Ben review it, Ben Reads Good, and he really liked it, and I was like, yes, this is all pointing in the right direction. It sounded kind of spooky, this sort of like old manor house, and then you've got a young woman who's working in like a garden, like preparing like fresh organic veg and doing it at the market, and she finds a body in her garden, a skeleton that's been there for a while. And so we have this sort of like dual timeline where we flash back and see like little bits of what happened in the past, and sort of indicating who this body may or may not be. And then we've got the current timeline where they're trying to figure out from the skeletal remains. And we have the young woman who lives in the cottage, the garden cottage, and we have a police officer who's come from London. And yeah, this book annoyed me pretty much instantly because I shall tell you why. Right at the beginning, when she finds this skeleton, she then sees a photograph and she's like, "That's the body." And you're like, "What? What are you talking about? Like, you who would even do that? Like, you just have no idea whose body that is. You can't be like, oh yeah, I think it's that photograph, the woman in that photograph over there. I'm not going to tell you whether she was right or wrong. But I was just like, that's ridiculous. That is, no one would do that. And then from that moment, you know, when you find something in a story that you just find so completely unbelievable, you then cannot connect with the book after that point. That's where I was at. And I mean, I think there were some interesting things in here. There were things about belonging and sort of finding your personal happy and not, you know, not subscribing to the rat race as well. Those sorts of things which I did enjoy and I thought they were interesting, but it just never, it was sort of hinged around this body, but then I didn't really care about it, and so it never really gelled together for me. And then again, similarly to the last one, I just found the ending so utterly unbelievable and ridiculous that it became a 2-star read. So yeah, no, not for me. I don't read a lot of mysteries, and maybe this is why, because I just don't like them. I just don't like them. So that was a fail. That one also failed. We then move slightly up in the rankings to a 3-star book. We have A Song to Drown Rivers by Liang. I have done a solo review for this because this was my hot or not pick, so I will leave that linked in the show notes. But in a nutshell, this is following the story of a young woman from Chinese legend who is like one of the 4 great beauties of China, who is sort of sent to an enemy court to become a concubine and sort of infiltrate the enemy kingdom from within. Sounded really interesting. It has fantasy elements to it, but it was YA. It's billed as adult fantasy, and it wasn't adult fantasy. It was YA. The politics was very simplistic. There's an insta-love storyline, which is an automatic turn-off for me, and I needed the book to be 200 to 300 pages longer and more in depth and more fleshed out than it was. The overall story arc I thought was good. It was interesting. It's definitely a page turner. So if you're into sort of YA historical fantasy, then definitely give this a whirl. But if you're not, then yeah, don't bother. It's pretty typical of the genre, I would say. Okay, now we move into slightly happier places. We have a 4-star read, and that is Lightfall, The Dark Times by Tim Probert, which is the 3rd in the Lightfall graphic novel series, which is a cute, cosy, middle grade fantasy graphic novel. I actually thought this was due to be a trilogy, but given where it ended, it's not. There will definitely be another one. So in this, we are in a fantastical land, the land of Urpa. Obviously, I'm not going to tell you what happens in this one because it's the 3rd in the series, but just give you an overview. And in this land, the sun has like disappeared, and they have like these lights, and those lights are under threat. And we follow our main character B, and she sort of accidentally stumbles upon this Galdurian who they sort of become friends and end up being sort of thrown into this adventure where they're trying to save the light in their kingdom. And it is honestly the most stunning book. I actually do have it here. The artwork in this is just absolutely stunning. So stunning. It's full colour graphic novel. and the illustrations just blow my mind. And I just love it. It's so cosy, it's so heartwarming. I particularly love that Tim Probert in this, he talks about anxiety and fear and belonging, and there's just so many lovely little themes and areas that Tim Probert touches on but doesn't slap you around the face with. It is about this adventure, and then there's just little bits of loveliness sprinkled in. And yeah, highly recommend if you're a fan of cozy graphic novels, if you like things like the Tea Dragon Society, then this is definitely like your bag. Do yourself a favour and pick yourself up a copy. In at third place, another 4-star, and we have Persepolis Rising by James S.A. Corey, which I read with my little sci-fi group. So that's Sandy at Miss Reads a Lot, Fraser Simons, Springboard Thoughts, and Sarah at Freshly Read Books. So we've been reading this series. This is the Expanse series, which is a sci-fi space opera epic jobby, and this is book 6 or 7? 7? Might be 7. Anyway, and in this we're following a crew on board a spaceship, the Rose Nancy, who in the first book a sort of proto-molecule virus type thing is sort of unleashed within our solar system, and then from there it's about the impact of that on their society, on their politics, and it just builds. So now you've got, I can't tell you because we're so far in, but there's like warring factions and rebellions, and it's multi-perspective, so you're following several different characters within this series. I didn't love the last book, but this one I felt like we got right back on track. It actually takes place 20 years after the events of the previous book. I think this was book 7. So it almost breaks into loose trilogies with big time hops between after each sort of third book. And yeah, I really liked it a lot. Unusual for these authors. This is an author duo. They left it on quite a cliffhanger, this one. So they're really ramping up to like the finale now, 2 books to go, and they're really starting to build some tension and some pressure within the narrative, which is interesting. So I'm very keen to finish this series in 2025, and yeah, definitely recommend The Expanse to anyone who's a fan of adventure or sci-fi or my perspective or any of those sorts of things. This is a lot of fun, Okay, in its second position, we have the first in the Boudica series, Dreaming the Eagle by Manda. This was recommended to me by Sarah at Your True Shelf. I had this on my Kindle for ages, had never heard anyone talk about it, so I'd sort of like forgotten it. It was in like the dusty back room of my Kindle. And then she absolutely raved about it on her channel, and I was like, right, okay, let's give it a go. It's quite a beast. It's a 700 page epic historical fiction set in the time when sort of Britain is divided into clans and Rome is sort of putting pressure on Britain and trying to sort of build its empire. And Sarah also identified this, but the juxtaposition between the way that the British were living at that time and the way that the Romans were living at that time is so like mind-boggling. The Britons are living in huts and it's very superstitious. They're very, very pagan, like praying to gods, and you know, and that sort of things was happening in Rome as well. But it's very sort of like animal skins and yeah, just this sort of, you really feel like you're in a round hut when you're reading the British sections, and then you go to Rome and they've got stuff like underfloor heating. I mean, it's not like what we have now, but you know, the difference between the two cultures is stark. And we follow Boudica in this really through her childhood. This is a quartet, and so this first one is her sort of coming of age, and there's a lot of violence, as you can imagine, but we also follow her brother, and I'm not going to talk too much about his time storyline because I think that uncovering that as I went through the book was one of my favourite things about this. His storyline is super interesting, and I wasn't expecting that element of it. So yeah, so you've got this split narrative, and obviously they cross in places, and it was super immersive. It's quite detail heavy, so there were a few times I felt a little bit bogged down by the detail, which is why it didn't get a 5-star. But at the same time, having that detail meant that I was so immersed in this world that Manda Scott had created, that I didn't want to leave it. By the time I finished the 700 pages, I was in love with the world and the characters, and it was, yeah, excellently written, and super keen to see what happens in the next one. I believe Sarah is reading it now, so if you want to know if the next book is as good, I also want to know, keep an eye on her channel, because I expect there will be a review for it soon if there hasn't already been one. I'm a little bit behind on booktube, so yes, loved it. And then in first place I have The Blinding Knife by Brent, which is the second in the Lightbringer series, which is a 5-book fantasy series. And the first book is The Black Prism. And I can't believe it took me so long to pick this up. I think I read the first one about 3 years ago, so I had to read like a synopsis before I went into this. And I loved being thrown back into this world with these characters. Again, multi-perspective. We follow various different characters. One of the interesting things that Brent does is we're following characters on both sides of a war. So you very much get these different perspectives, and neither side is perfect. And yeah, I quite like the way he does that. But in this fantastical world, the magic system is based on light, so people can sort of absorb certain colours from the light spectrum and then do stuff with that. And different colours have different properties, so you can absorb sort of infrared and then you can see things in the dark, or you can absorb blue and you can make like solid structures with that, or like green is like sticky, and yeah, it's really well crafted. And also the light that you absorb has an effect on your emotions, which is really interesting. So if you are a blue chromat, then you tend to be quite a calm person. It is one of those that calms you down, and you're quite steady and logical, and just those little touches make it so granular and so vivid, and it's brilliant. And so most people can only work with one colour, but the Prism, who is like almost the military lead for the world, he can absorb all colours in the spectrum. And his name is Gavin. And so we follow Gavin, we follow other people in his storyline, and we sort of see we're at the point where a big conflict is building, and it sort of comes to a crescendo towards the end of this book, but we can see that it's, you know, is by no means over. There's 3 more books to go. One of the other things that I really loved about this book in particular is there's one perspective, Kip, and he's a young boy, and so we get like a coming of age and also like a magic school trope in this as well. I love both of those. Really well done in this. Friendships, great. I was talking about this the other day, but there is a romance subplot in this, and I loved it because it built over like 1,000 pages. Like first book and second book, and so it was a believable romance, and I was rooting for it by that point. I was like, yes, do it. So yeah, I just loved it so much, and it's taking all of my willpower not to just go out and buy the 3rd one of this, because I have put it on my Christmas list. So I'm hoping someone will buy it for me for Christmas. If not, I will be going straight out and buying the 3rd one, because I am very keen to see what happens next, because some big plot things happened in that book. And so yeah, if you are a fantasy lover, if you like multi-perspective political fantasy, then definitely be picking up some Lightbringer. You need it in your life. And that was it. That was the 7 books. It was not many books, but I did read some chunkier ones. Obviously, this one is over 700 pages. The Manda Scott was 700 pages. Persepolis Rising was over 500. So, you know, bigger books and also less time. I just had less time in November as well. So a short and sweet wrap up for a change. But I'd love to know what were the best books that you read in November, what were the worst, and have you read any of the books that I talked about today, and do you have any thoughts, opinions, differing or similar? I accept them all. If you missed my review of A Song to Drown Rivers, I will leave that review here for you, and I will see you all very soon with another one. Bye guys.